Welcome to the Real View podcast, where Ohio Realtors connect you to innovators and influencers, keeping you with the real view of real estate. Whether you're a broker, agent, first-time homebuyer, industry leader, or just happen to stumble upon our podcast today, you can expect to hear tips, tools, tricks, interesting information, and so much more from the experts in Ohio's real estate game. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Real View podcast. I am your host, Allison Wiley. Joining me today is our special guest, Bob Brown. He is an author, speaker, patented innovator, and the foremost authority on foundation repair diagnosis. Is an insider with more than 35 years experience. He brings transparency, accountability, and engineering efficiency to an otherwise opaque industry. His forthcoming book, Foundation Repair Secrets, reveals little-known solutions to save time and money by avoiding costly repairs or, worse, the wrong repairs. So I'm super excited to have you on the show, Bob. Welcome on.
Thank you for having me. I'm anxious to share with your audience.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be talking about this topic, especially from a perspective such as yours, an industry expert, and learn how we as realtors can take your knowledge and your experience and what you've seen over the course of your career and keep it top of mind as we work with our clients on making sure we're finding them the best properties from them and navigating everything that comes along with that. But before we get started into details, I'd like to know a little bit more about you. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got started in the industry, and what's led you to where you are today?
So many years ago, I graduated from Arizona State University in architecture and in finance. And the way I worked my way through college, because I didn't have any money, was to do concrete repairs for commercial properties. And I just kind of kept that business up. I never did go into real estate development, which is what my degree was supposed to be for. And I just kept doing concrete repairs. And eventually that led me to foundation repairs. And I basically had a large supplier contact me and want me to be their single unique installer for an area. So I said yes. And they basically taught me about soils and about foundation repair and all that kind of stuff. And of course, what they taught me was how to recognize problems through the lens of their solutions, which is what all the suppliers do. And that's a problem in the industry. And so until I kind of figured things out on my own, I was kind of subject to the same problems that everybody else in the industry is stuck with.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a great perspective and a great point there that you're looking at it from a more holistic approach, I think. And like as an overall, you've been able to see, I'm sure, many, many things, and you're taking what you're seeing and applying it into, everyday solutions, which I think is really great. And that's another reason why it's super great we're having you on here today. In your opinion, I think we all know as people who work with homes, our homeowners ourselves, the importance of having that strong foundation, right? But in your opinion, tell us a little bit about why you think it's so important and just talk to us about the importance of that and how it really impacts so much else of homes and land around it.
Well, okay. So foundations, it's what the weight of the house rests upon. Typically in modern houses, you have a truss system, and that truss pushes all the weight to the perimeter walls. So the interior walls of a house don't bear the roof loads at all, just the perimeter walls. And then those walls go straight down to the footings, and the footings is what bears the loads for that weight. And so they're down in the ground a little ways, they're a little thicker, they have reinforcing in them, but they still rest upon the soil. And so soil in reality is what is bearing the loads. And so soil can be complicated. A lot of people think soil is, just a brown mass of dirt down there that's all the same. It's not. It's in layers with different mineral contents in each layer, different density and affinities for soil or for water. And water travels between those layers and it does different things to them. It might expand some of them. It might contract some of them. And they're not even. They're not exactly, they tilt and they disappear and reappear and we've got rocks and it's very, very complicated, which is why we have geotechnical engineers to help us understand it.
Yeah.
So if your foundation is on that and it's moving, you want to know, most people want to know, well, Is it going to continue to move? Is my house going to fall down? How bad is it? They have all these questions. And the problem is, most people call the wrong person. They Google it. What do you Google foundation repairs? What do you see? Foundation repair companies. Well, who are they going to send out? They're going to send out a commissioned salesperson who is on 100% commission. So if they sell nothing, they make nothing. And most of these guys do very well. They make somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 a year. And if they don't make at least 100,000 a year, they get fired. Very competitive industry. These guys, they come out to your home, and how are they going to answer these questions? How bad is it? Is it going to continue to move? All these questions, right? Well, how do you think they're going to answer those questions when they're trying to sell an $80,000 job to make a commission? I've heard answers like, well, Mr. Jones, on a scale of 1 to 10, I think your foundation's like an 8.5. And I'm thinking, well, what scale is that?
Right.
Is that like the Richter scale of foundation repair? What is that? And by the way, how did you arrive at 8.5? Well, based on my years of experience and the fact that my kids need braces, I mean, honestly, that's what you get. Now, their analysis is free. You call them up and they come out to your house and it's free, but that's what you're going to get. You're not going to get analysis. You're going to get a sales presentation. And so who do you call? Well, a little harder to find, but you want to call a forensic geotechnical engineer. Now, they're not going to be free, but they're also not going to be biased. And they're engineers. So they're held to a standard of ethics, and their ethics are overseen by the board of registration for their state. And they got nothing to grind. They got no axe to grind. They got no dog in the fight. They're going to tell you like it is, how it is. They're going to give you standards. They're going to give you opinions that are based on science and engineering principles, and you're going to get good advice.
Yeah, that's a great bit of advice, I think, because, oftentimes it could be such a serious thing, and I think there's fear that comes along with that. I think it's, oh no, what am I going to do? Like you said, is my house going to fall down? The money that's associated with it.
Right.
I mean, what do you tell those people who maybe experience something like that or put a counter in the future to help kind of calm those fears and those worries? And how do you kind of work through that if something is wrong?
First of all, let's talk about how do you know if something's wrong. Let's talk about how to recognize it, okay?
Yeah.
So the most telling sign is going to be cracks on your interior walls. Sometimes exterior walls, if it's brick or block, not so much if it's stucco or wood siding, but cracks in the walls, and then sloping floors, cracks in the floors, doors and windows that are out of square. So if you have like a door that's pinched at the top, like it's fat on one side and pinched on the other, same thing with windows. If you get those in a grouping, in a pattern, then you kind of realize that there's probably some foundation movement going on, or maybe some slab movement, and they're not the same thing. Slabs are not foundations because the foundations bear the weight on the perimeter, but you could still have slab movement and it causes problems on the interior of the house, right? So at that point, let's just say you call out a foundation repair contractor, or you call 3. And one of them tells you, well, you need 6 piers over here. And the other one tells you, no, you need 15 over here. And the third one tells you, no, you need 25 piers all the way around. I mean, as a homeowner or a real estate professional, how do you know which one is right? You're not a professional in the business. How can you evaluate? First of all, they don't give you any analysis. They might do some floor level readings. They might do a little bit of analysis, but most of the time they're just going to do a sales presentation, tell you what they think you need. And so you end up going with the one that you feel the most comfortable with, which probably is going to be the guy who's the best salesman, right? Which probably is going to be the least qualified to be an engineering type of thinking in your head. So a better plan is to get a forensic engineer involved, have him do the analysis, have him give you a plan that says, do this, put 6 piers right here. Or maybe he'll say, you know what? Yeah, it's pretty bad damage, but it's done moving. So just patch it up and be done with it. Anybody else who will tell you that something's done moving or it's not done moving, and they're not geotechnical engineers, they're BSing you because they don't understand soils. They don't understand what's going on down there. geotechnical engineers do. But it's better to get a plan. Now you can take that plan and you can bid it out to 3 or 4 or 10 engineer or contractors. You can send it out, and please bid it per plan and spec. Don't give me what you think your opinion is. Bid it per plan and spec. Then you can compare apples to apples and get a good deal, right? It's worth its weight in gold. Yeah, you have to spend a little bit of money up front, but it's going to pay for itself a gazillion times over on the back end.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Great advice. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've seen that's out there about foundation repair? And I know you talked a little bit about some of the people that are initially hired to help you with that, but what misconceptions exist out there that you kind of want to debunk from us or tell a different story about?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I have a newsletter, and if you sign up for the newsletter on my website, which is foundationrepairsecrets.com, I have a publication that I'll send out for free called The 15 Myths of the Foundation Repair Business as it relates to real estate, and also the 10 most common mistakes. So you can get those for free. And I realize that for people that are not in the business, what I'm saying is sort of like drinking from a fire hose today. But you can go back and get this information and review it and try to absorb it a little bit more. But let's take one common myth. One we sort of already talked about, the fact that people's misconception about dirt, about soil, that it's a real simple thing. It's not. Very complicated and requires geotechnical engineering to really understand it. Let's take a really interesting one. Let's talk about who oversees the designs of these repair plans. That's an interesting one. So if you say to the contractor, have you had an engineer look over this plan to make sure it's right? He's going to say, oh, yeah. When we pull permits, we have to get an engineer seal to pull the permits, and they're going to look over everything and make sure it's right. Well, that's a lie. And I'll tell you why it's a lie. Because the engineer was not involved in gathering the initial information. It was the sales guy. And engineers, by code, cannot seal information that they did not gather themselves or somebody under their direct employ, like an employee. It cannot be somebody else from another company. So all they can do, when you pull a permit, the only thing that the permit requires is that there be a spacing calculation for the piers. So you don't want to have the piers too far apart. You might droop between them. So they want to see a calculation to show that the spacing is appropriate. That's all. That's all you're doing. And I can tell you time after time examples of engineers that have sealed a plan and there's a serious problem. The engineer didn't even know about it. And the problem went unaddressed, even though there was a permit pulled on the job that was sealed. The plan was sealed by an engineer. So again, don't rely on that promise that, the engineer is going to look over this and make sure everything's okay. No, that is not true. Will not.
This episode of The Real View is brought to you by the Ohio Association of Community Colleges. Ohio's network of community colleges provides accessible training that accommodates the busy lifestyles of aspiring real estate professionals at half the price of a traditional university. With convenient locations in every part of the state, as well as online options, Ohio's community colleges are your smart choice for pre-licensing education. For more details or to start the journey to a real estate career, visit the education page at ohiorealtors.org and then click on the pre-license course locations.
Yeah, definitely. Important to always, like you said, find that engineer, make sure that person is looking at it directly for you. Don't trust the word of whoever you're working with. Is there any way or any signs that we should be looking out for, preventatively versus, waiting to see that crack in the wall or see those floors sloping, or what preventative steps can we take to get ahead of this?
Great question. So part of it depends on where you're at. Okay. So different parts of the country have different soils, and different parts of the country have different moisture profiles. So like in Houston, it's pretty dang wet, right? Gulf Coast area, a lot of rain. Arizona, pretty dry, right? But what you want to do, the name of the game in foundation and keeping soils, your foundation stable, is to keep the water the same as it's been without any changes. What I mean by the same, I mean the same since like 1,000, 2,000, maybe 10 or 50,000 years. So in Houston, it's been wet for a long time, right? In Phoenix, it's been dry for a long time. So in Phoenix, the name of the game is to keep everything dry. You want to move the water away, put gutters on the house, pipe those 10 feet away, make sure the water slopes, don't have any planters to retain the moisture from the roof when it falls, all that stuff, right? In Dallas or Houston, what they do is they put a soaker all the way around the house with a timer on it that injects water to keep it moist. Now, you would never do that in Phoenix. Never. That would be like brain damage in Phoenix. You would never do that.
That'd be causing a problem that may, not be there otherwise, right?
Right, right. So there are things you can do to maintain that, your foundation, but you need some good advice from the geotechnical community on what they suggest needs to be done, right? Because all the areas are different. And I would say that most of the time, it's probably about keeping moisture away, except for in the really wet areas, like maybe Seattle and Portland and Northern California coast areas, right? Gulf areas, Florida, where it rains a lot, you want to keep it wet. And I wish I could go into more detail because, even when you get onto micro scales, it changes. Like right in the Phoenix area, you have some areas with clay, some areas with not. Well, it all differs very, very much. So you just have to get some good advice from people in the geotechnical industry.
I think that's so fascinating that someone specializes in this and can take a look at this and say, hey, here's how the ground should be. Here's how it's impacting, your structure, because it's the basis of everything, right? I mean, it's we've always said this foundation is the most important. If it's not strong, then what else can you have? So I think that's, it's really interesting, really fascinating and important to get those experts out there. I mean, who else better to take a look at this than someone who's super qualified and is dealing with this every day. So that's really great. So how can realtors assist their clients with this? And what's the role that the realtor can play, when it comes to some of these foundation issues, when we think about homes that are going to go through a sale transaction, maybe something comes up on an inspection report. How can we as realtors kind of navigate this? And how do you see us having a role in helping and assisting if anything comes up with foundations during a home sale transaction?
Well, great question. There's a lot of things I can answer in there. Let's look at the seller side first, and then we'll look at the buyer side, okay? So as a seller, I would learn to recognize these signs of stress that we talked about, the cracks in the doors and the floors and all that kind of stuff, right? And if you're going to a listing of a house and you notice these things, as a realtor, it's part of your job to understand these things. You're not a technical person. You're not responsible for understanding it, interpreting it, telling people what to do, but you are responsible for seeing it and recognizing it. Okay. So what I would do if I was a realtor is I would find the geotechnical experts in my area and make a relationship with them. It could be kind of a niche that you can carve out for yourself, maybe that other people don't have the expertise that you do, right? And now you carved this niche out. You've got professionals that you have a relationship with. Get to know them. Maybe take them to lunch. Understand what they're doing. Get their advice, all that kind of stuff. And when you call them and say, "Hey, I got a project," it's not like some stranger calling them out of the blue, right? And then they're going to come out and they're going to look at it. They're going to do their analysis, and they're going to tell you, "No, you don't have a problem here." Okay. And they'll put that and they'll seal it. And then if any crazy home inspector says, "Yeah, I think there's a problem," you can just give them this thing and says, "Nope, I've had it evaluated by an engineer and he says it's not a problem." Okay. Now, if there is a problem, get it done, get it taken care of, fix it. And then the engineer will seal it again saying, "Hey, it was done per my instructions. I supervised the work. It was done right. And I sealed it." Okay. All right. Now, again, you've got this seal that you can present to buyers that's very, very valuable, right? And it's more valuable than lifetime warranty that you get from the foundation repair companies. We'll talk about that. It's not worth anything. And now let's look at the other side. Let's look at the buyer side. It's a little more difficult to convince a buyer that, hey, spend $1,000 on a house you may or may not buy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's better than buying the house and having to spend 80 grand later on, right? So what I would do if I was a listing agent is I would put in the clause, in my purchase clause contract, a delay clause should the inspector bring up the fact that there's possible foundation issues that maybe you didn't really recognize, right? What happens now is that the inspector gives you a report and there's like 2 days left in the inspection window. It's like, well, I got to find an engineer and get a report in 2 days. Like, no, that's not going to happen, So give yourself an extension, 2, maybe 3 weeks to go find, hopefully you've got a relationship with the forensic engineer. You can call him up and say, hey, I need you out here. And he can come out and do a report. And then you'll know what happens. The mistake that most realtors make is they call a contractor instead. And the contractor, guess what? He's going to come out there. And what's his agenda? His agenda is to make a commission. And so I could pretty much guarantee you every time they come out, they're going to make a recommendation for a big repair, $40,000, $80,000. Well, what's that going to do to your listing? It's going to blow it up. The buyer's going to head for the hills, right? And it may not be the case. It may be that, okay, all we need to do is manage the grading and drainage around the property and it's going to be just fine. And the engineer will tell you that. The contractor's certainly not going to tell you that. That's for sure. He wants to make a $40,000 sale.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great advice. And that's something, to keep in mind, because I think this can feel so overwhelming sometimes to take this task on or to know that there's an issue. And to think about that could be a little overwhelming and scary. And I think knowing that sometimes if you get the right people involved, who really are doing you the best service that they can, who are not in it for the wrong reasons, you might be okay. And it might not be as scary or as big as an undertaking as you might think when it comes to this.
Right. It may not be the great big boogeyman that you're thinking of. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think that's an important, thing to know because I think a lot of the times they could be scary and overwhelming. It's like instantly, all right, I'm out. Like I can't do this. How am I gonna, spend this much money on something? It's gonna, put me into crazy amounts of debt. And it's good to know that sometimes there are those solutions that could just be as simple as moving things around or easy fixes that can solve the problem for you. So what do you think is your best advice in working with foundation repair? If you're talking to consumers, if you're talking to realtors, I know you mentioned some really great things and tips on who to talk to, who not to talk to, how to get the best advice. But what's your best, bit that you want people listening to take away with them as they're done listening today?
Well, the most important thing, in my opinion, is who you call.
Yeah.
It's a little harder to find forensic engineers. They're not masters of marketing like foundation repair companies. They're really good at marketing. I know I owned one. I also owned a forensic engineering company. So I know the challenges on both sides. And it's easy to find foundation repair companies. They're great at marketing. I did on my website, Foundation Repair Secrets, I have a directory by state for forensic engineers. Now, I haven't vetted these people. I've just looked them up and tried to find people that I think are offering this service. It's a good place to start. Hopefully, over time, I'll be able to get a little more work done on this and vet people and have more people offer this service. One of the things that I'd like to see happen, and I'm starting to train home inspectors on how to do what we call a floor elevation survey. And what that is you take an instrument around every 5 feet around the floor plan of the house, and it records the elevations. And you put it into a computer program, and it gives you a visual representation of what's high and what's low. And the reason that I think that's important is if you do that on every transaction, then 5 years down the road, when somebody else wants to buy the house, you actually have a history. You know what happened 5 years ago. It was this profile, and now it's this profile. Maybe it's exactly the same, or maybe it's moved, but you have a lot more information. So I'm starting to train home inspectors to be able to offer this so that over time we can all gather this information and use it to our benefit.
Yeah, it's really smart. And even just as we mentioned, you're talking about maintenance and like getting ahead of this. That could be something, you're running frequently even before you're going to get ready to sell your house, just to make sure, everything is staying the same, or if it's moving, you're able to get ahead of some of this. I think that's really great. And that technology is starting to become more accessible and being a part of, home inspectors and things like that could really make a big difference in this world.
I think it can make a big difference. And this industry is, as you mentioned, a bit of a smoke and mirror industry. We want to try to clear things up and make it a little bit less opaque for people so that they can clearly see it, understand it, and be informed and make good decisions with that information.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, you're taking the time to do that because, as I mentioned before, it can be overwhelming or scary for some people. And I think because part of that is lack of knowledge, part of it is not really knowing, how everything works, that fear of the unknown, being unsure of who to talk to or how to handle certain situations. So, hats off to you for taking that under. And I hope that, it'll continue to bring people more clarity when it comes to what could be a tricky topic for some people. So for doing that for sure.
Yeah. And, you can always go to my book, which is out now, and you can find it on Amazon, Foundation Repair Secrets. And that will give you a good foundation to start with.
I love it. I love it. Yes, we'll definitely check that book out and check out all the resources that Bob's mentioned on his website too. I know for any realtor, as you mentioned, Bob, what a way to provide a high quality service to your clients.
Yeah, I agree. I think it could be a great niche for somebody who is really on the ball.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's really when we talk about value proposition and how we can be of service and value to our clients. I mean, wow, that's a great tool to have in your toolbox. So, Bob, thank you again so much for coming on and joining me today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I know I learned a lot, and thanks for everything you're doing for our industry.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to try to help people. That's my goal in life.
Yeah, we appreciate it so much. And to all of our listeners who tuned in today, thank you guys so much. We'll be back with you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Real View. That wraps up today's episode. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at ohiorealtors.org/therealview and on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Have questions, comments, or suggestions? We want to hear from you. Email us at podcast@ohiorealtors.org. We'll see you next time.